Ross Ulbricht is serving a double life sentence without parole for all nonviolent charges for creating a website. Please help free this peaceful man. Go to freeross.org and sign and share the petition.
So it's little wonder that smart shoppers everywhere take time out to pause and refresh. And where else but in the fountain where they serve ice-cold Coca-Cola?
The eMilitia Podcast, Episode 33, Hoplite Armor, Lyman Bishop for Governor. Enjoy.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. We have another awesome guest episode coming at you today. Joining us for this episode, we have Mr. Lyman Bishop, the CEO of Hoplite Armor, defier of bootlickers, and he's now running for governor of Montana on a 2A absolutist platform. So, as you know from our brand, mixing with this brand, we're probably going to have a lot of interesting conversations, but also going to have a lot of things in common. But Mr. Bishop, why don't you give us your background and what got you into doing what you're doing now with body armor and everything? What brought you into the scene?
And first, let me say I like the term that you're using, 2A absolutist. I'd really never heard of that term, but I think it's pretty accurate.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Everything I've seen from you, it's all hardline stuff, which is what we love around here.
Well, very much so. I mean, just logical adherence to the law of the land, which is, in fact, the Constitution, of course, right?
Of course. Not that it's paid much heed these days.
Right.
And that is a big problem. And that's a big part of why I'm doing what I'm doing. But, going back 15 years is when I first got into the armor industry. So my background is in mechanical engineering, and I've done a lot with new product design and development. Back in 2003, I first got interested in body armor by way of a DARPA project by the name of Human Performance Augmentation.
Was this the future soldier stuff?
It was the precursor to that. Yes, it was.
Wow.
And I left something out. A key portion of that title is Exoskeletons for Human Performance Augmentation. And that just got me very interested in the idea of enhancing a soldier's survivability and endurance in particular, certainly adding to their lethality. And what I began with was a complete head-to-toe armor system that I designed. Way ahead of its time and way too early to try to bring something like that to market. And I recognized that pretty quick just because the armor industry in particular tends to adhere to the tried and true, that which is known and understood. And
contracts you can sell.
Oh, yeah, well, and contracts that, people want to put out and things they want to buy.
Yeah.
Certainly generated a lot of attention just by way of the fact that it was so different than anything that had ever been developed,
so
at least in the real world.
I'm picturing like an Iron Man suit. Is kind of what you're talking about. Something along the lines.
Well, yeah,
It's like Master Chief's
minus the computers and the iron, I suppose, right? The materials we use are polymer.
Okay.
But essentially that's you've got the right idea, right? An exoskeletal armor system, shin plates,
ergonomic, and
that's right.
Was this a project you took on by yourself before you started your company?
Yes.
Okay.
Obviously, it was not my full-time enterprise. I've got other business interests, but this is an area where I felt that I could contribute.
It's a pretty cool hobby.
So did you did you already have like manufacturing infrastructures in place and just something that you felt to like exploring, or is this something like that drove you to start doing the manufacturing?
Well, and just to be clear, I never have, nor will I ever probably manufacture anything myself. I design things.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Okay. I use 3D CAD design programs, and I utilize my understanding of existing materials and manufacturing processes in order to design systems that will function.
Gotcha.
Very good.
That's where it started. Over the course of several years, I made contacts within the industry, and typically the industry is very closed. If you're not retired military or police, you will typically have a difficult time getting into the industry. That's not always the case, but by and large, that is so. And I think the one thing that I brought to the table that really kind of helped me push my way through the door was the fact that I was doing things that nobody else was doing. And that's really still the case. There's very little in the way of design going into, new and unusual products within the armor industry. Most of what you see out there is just savvy plates or swimmer plates based on existing military specification geometry. So,
and your company was the first company I ever saw shoulder plates with.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Or any plate that wasn't just your standard front and back chest plates, basically.
I thought so too, but early on, I did see, I think it was Cry Precision put something out, but it looked almost more like it rode up really high on the shoulder. It was more of like a collarbone protection is really what it looked like, but I think it was intended to be more. I don't know what they made these things out of or what level they were. I'm quite certain they were not rifle rated. Mm-hmm. And to that end, I would say that to the best of my knowledge, I am the only one that has ever designed any sort of hard armor rifle rated solution to protect the deltoid, right? In particular, with regards to lateral impacts. That's a big issue when you're fighting in close quarters. Taking shots from different angles is certainly a big liability.
Yeah, that's what put you on my radar way back when, because I've always been kind of a gear nerd. I enjoy things that are different and that stand out. And Hoplite, just years ago, I saw you guys coming out with the shoulder plates. I was like, wow, you just don't see stuff like that. And it's something oddly not considered. You'd think all these people, like you said, are veterans coming back and getting into the industry, but then they just do the same thing everyone else is doing, despite surely having experiences from like the shoulder plates. I think I read something on your about your products that kind of intended for like high angle shots, because there's a lot at risk going into the shoulder. And you'd think these people would have experience with those kind of wounds and think, this is something that needs to happen. And yet there's just so little on the market with that kind of innovative idea.
And it's not really.
Would think that. But I can tell you some stories that help you understand why that's not the case, right? You've got an outfit called Army Natick Labs that is a civilian laboratory, a civilian-run military laboratory, I guess I should say. And as is the case with a lot of organizations, there tends to be a lot of what you might call inbreeding, in a sense, right? And what I mean by that is projects that are developed internally tend to be favored over anything developed externally, regardless of the performance or capability of said design. So what you're seeing happen with the military is they took a project that was started by some people that worked at Army Natick Labs, and that's what they funded. That's what they put their big push behind. And so what they've done is they've gotten rid of what used to be referred to as the DAPS, or the Deltoid Auxiliary Protection System, and they've integrated that now into what they call the combat shirt. So you've got these Kevlar inserts essentially built into the shirt. And that's great. It's an improvement over what they had, but in the end, they are lacking severely in the sense that they are incapable of stopping anything greater than a 9mm. And in many cases, the high-speed fragmentation from an IED alone would certainly penetrate that and cause damage. I was told early on by a retired colonel that used to work in the Pentagon, save the joint, save the limb. And so that's always been the goal, right? If we can save the joint, the shoulder joint, we can save the limb. And just to give you an example, recently, and I don't recall if I pulled it from Instagram. I think I might have, but there was a photo I posted of a guy that got hit in the shoulder with a 308.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. A round that we can easily stop with the shoulder plates, but it just decimated this guy's shoulder. There was literally nothing left, but a big hole. And it was, terrible to look at, but it drove the point home that it is a vulnerability and it is an issue that needs to be addressed. I actually had a friend who in 2004 was at the Battle of An Najaf on a rooftop with some Blackwater guys. And they were overrun by 800 enemy combatants. And maybe I shouldn't say overrun because they did hold them off. But during the fight, my friend took a shot to the deltoid. And luckily, it hit him towards the back of the deltoid. So what ended up happening was this round got under his skin, and it traveled behind the back plate where it sort of retained the position of the bullet. It stayed under his skin, traveled all the way through to his spine, and stopped just short of it.
Oh,
Jesus.
Had he been wearing a shoulder plate, it would have been an edge shot and it would have deflected, but it would have prevented the injury.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot.
It's a damn shame that we kind of got to the point of, let's protect the vitals, and then there just wasn't anything further.
It is vitals too, because if you get a perfectly lateral shot, it's going to go right to the heart through the arm, through the shoulder. So I mean,
and if you're incapacitated, you're not fighting either. So
good point.
And that'll kill you.
Yeah, exactly. That'll kill you just as bad.
And so, as you can see, I mean, more than anything, what I'm really trying to do is to bring some innovation to an industry that, while there's been significant advancements in materials, there's been little in the way of advancements in design.
Yeah. Kind of stagnated on the innovation side rather than just improving what's already out there.
Right, and really that's the result of the fact that there are not nearly enough mechanical engineers in the armor industry. The company that I work with, LTC, Leading Technology Composites, they are far and away the world leader with regards to production, but also design and development. But and they've got a whole group of engineers there at their facility, most of whom are focused on things like vehicle armor, or, in the event that I bring something to them to work on, okay, they focus on that. But, they're obviously just dealing with the things that pay them and pay the company, which is by and large standard stuff.
Yeah. Stuff that there's already contracts for, and, things that's going to keep on being on the table rather than trying to bring something new that right. You'd have to fight to get,
the safe road.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, a road paved with gold, from what I can tell. I mean, they do a significant amount of business. And, when you're doing that kind of production and meeting those demands, there's not a whole lot of need to develop your own unique things in that way and take a risk and waste time and salaries on different things. And I think that's one of the things that they appreciate about me, is that I tend to bring a lot of unusual things to them for development. And I get a lot of help from them as a result. They're always
it's one of those things. It's nice that you're an independent and you have the time to be able to experiment. And then when you finally drop this on the other engineers who are just doing the same boring old thing every day, they're happy to jump into a project that is a little bit different and might push the edges out a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. And, the higher ups love to give them these things because it broadens their understanding of what's possible.
Oh, yeah, that can never hurt. So, what was kind of the timeline for your company, I guess? So you're working on this proto future soldier project. Sorry, I forget the name.
Exoskeletons for human performance augmentation, and that morphed quickly to body armor development, just by way of the fact that I felt like I was already knocking at the door, so to speak, with the things I was designing and developing. It was a short jump to developing body armor.
Gotcha.
There's some unique things that go into designing and engineering systems around the human body. We refer to it as human factors engineering. And of course, the geometry of the human body being what it is, that creates a number of challenges technically that I had to overcome just in my understanding of my abilities in operating SolidWorks, the CAD program I use. So, yeah, it's understandable why you wouldn't have a lot of companies doing this sort of thing. It took me years to develop the techniques that I've come up with to do these things. And that's certainly not a profitable position. I was lucky that I was, as you say, independent and able to focus a considerable amount of time towards these things and personal resources. And that's really what made it possible. It was sort of an anomaly, I think, more than anything.
Yeah. So after the exoskeleton, did you just naturally move into plates first, like regular, front back static plates? Or
I wouldn't call them regular. What I did is
okay.
I started there, right, with chest, back, and shoulders, and what I tried to do initially was to develop plate solutions for all the different segments of the body according to the geometry of that part of the body. So, for instance, the chest plate, obviously, very much similar to what you see now, but with some extended coverage areas and some unique cuts to allow for better movement. The back followed the contour of the spine, and the shoulders, of course. You see where that ended up. But in the early days, we did have a considerable amount more curvature in the materials. But what we found over time was that the curvature was too great and it was causing issues with production. So I kind of had to back off of that. And the transition, and there's a story here if you want to hear it, right? But the transition took a long time, right? I mean, I started poking around with these things in 2003. It was closer to 2007 by the time I had really refined everything into essentially a ready for manufacture product. But again, this was still the head to toe system. And that required a considerable amount of tooling to be made. So I partnered with a company out of Ohio, and we formed a company together called Star Labs. And probably the biggest strategic error I made there was that I agreed to a 50-50 deal. And what that ended up doing was locking us in a place where we really couldn't move forward, because I had one idea how to move things forward. They had another. And, that led to stagnation, right?
50-50 partnerships are tough.
They are. And, and I was in a position where I really wanted to move it forward, and I really didn't want to keep spending my own money. So I thought it would be a good solution. When we initially did the deal, we had a deal pending with a larger company to produce and distribute the product, but that company shortly thereafter fell into some hard times financially, and that's where we kind of locked up, and things sat stagnant for the most part. We always tried to dig it out of the mud from time to time, but it was stuck, I would say, from 2009 to until Hoplite was started in 2015. And that was shortly after I relocated to Montana. And one day out of the blue, my partners called me up and wanted to buy me out. And the buyout was nowhere near the amount of money I had put into it, but I did really want to design some new systems based on ideas I had, in the meantime. So they ended up buying me out with the condition that I could compete. As long as I didn't infringe on our existing patents, no problem. So that's what we did. I took their check. I signed it over to them. I started Hoplite literally the next day. And the rest is history, I suppose. Slow history, but it's history.
Did you retain any rights to royalties on your patents, or that was part of the buyout?
Well, there actually is a stipulation in the agreement that in the event they sell it, I get X, or if they there's various things in there where, yes, I will get additional money. In fact, I believe that selling the rights to another company now, and I'll get a little money, but it's not even enough to pay my bills for a month, so it's not a huge win.
Not significant.
But something's better than nothing. I'll take it.
They squandered your ideas.
It happens, but
Yep.
listen, these are the lessons you learn when you start a business and you develop a new product. It is a path that is fraught with all manner of danger and distraction. And I've learned a lot from that. And, case in point, when I started Hoplite, it was a very short period of time from the day that I started the corporation to the day that I had a ready for manufacture to design, and it took even less time to bring it into production. So I was able to apply a lot of those lessons into Hoplite, and I credit that to a lot of my success moving forward.
I guess moving on, if we're all up to date on that.
I want to know if you have your own exoskeleton.
That's a good.
I have a great many things that nobody knows about.
that's a good answer.
That's probably the world's largest private body armor collection.
Got like a whole Tony Stark suit of armor, just like
probably has it sitting on mannequins.
I just keep thinking of aliens.
Tony Stark.
Yeah, all I can think is Tony Stark right now.
All right, take Tony Stark, take all his assets, divide it by like 1,000, and put him in Montana, and that's me.
There you go.
Are you only developing defensive gears, or do you
repulsors?
So check this out. I've actually done some pretty cool stuff in the past. One of the things that was all right. I mean, it was cool. It looked cooler than it really was, but
that's what's important.
Yeah, I mean that's all that matters.
It was an electronic flashbang grenade substitute. So this thing had a aluminum, shell, round like a baseball, and you'd push a button and it would screech real loud and it would flash with big bright, Cree LEDs, and that's fine and neat, but it never really amounted to much. We brought an investor in there. Here's another lesson learned, right? We brought in an investor, and he put in a certain amount of money, but then he began to put that money into the areas that we didn't all necessarily agree with. We ended up where we needed more money. He was happy to put it in, but he wanted more shares. So we all sort of decided we'll just walk away from this thing and leave him with not a whole lot. And that's really where it ended up. We got some money from the guy in the end to let him just go and do it. But it really never amounted to much. But it was fun to work on nonetheless. So, I can't complain. And I learned a lot. But one thing that I put together that is actually very cool, and I did this for, do you remember that show, Sons of Guns?
Yes.
The crazy guy, I think he's in prison now or something.
Oh, yeah.
But on one of their shows, they had put together basically a rocket launcher, okay? And they were using model rockets and putting them inside a tube and firing them out of it, loading them up with God knows what, gunpowder, whatever, shooting them out of this thing. And the problem was the tube had, let's say, an inside diameter of 3 inches, and maybe their tail fins matched, but the nose cone was, 1.5 inch diameter. So what happened? It sat in the tube cockeyed. Well, when they fired it, half the time the thing would corkscrew out or come back at them. It was a mess, but I could see potential. So I designed a rocket specifically to be shot from a tube. So essentially what I did was make a nose cone that had the same diameter as the tail fins. And in this way, it would sit inside the tube level, it would come out straight, and it would do its job. Now, as a result of various federal laws about putting explosives in rockets, I'll tell you, I never blew one up, certainly not. But I will also tell you that this thing I made, and there's actually a video I could send you that my friend took when we tested it out in the desert of Nevada, and he sat downrange about 300 yards. There was no explosives in it.
Okay.
He was 300 yards downrange. I pointed this thing straight at him. We had a slight cross breeze, so I knew that it wouldn't hit him. And I launched this thing in his direction, and he got it on video. And not only was the accuracy ridiculous, I mean, it landed right exactly where I put the thing. had that thing been loaded up with, gunpowder and flechettes, it would have made a mess of, a crowd of people right there if that's what you wanted to do. So
sounds like it would have made a mess of your friend.
Well, yes, right. That's why it was inert. Certainly.
I'm sure he had a few beers bought for him afterwards.
I think I recall something along those lines. And but that was really cool. I mean, when you're talking about, offense devices, we'll call them, that was one of the funner things I've worked on. Again, legal disclaimer, never blew one up, but I have word that a gentleman in Kentucky did, but there.
That's his own devices.
Right. I take no responsibility for other people's actions, but
and their fun.
But I understand it.
Nor should you.
Well, that's very true.
Civilian-owned rocket launchers coming soon, people. No.
So here's the deal with that, and why you got to be real careful. So kids, don't try this at home. The rules of engagement, as I understand it, even on U.S. soil, is anybody seen with a rocket launcher is to be shot on sight, right?
Oh.
So it's really not something you want to play around with. Even if it is just a model rocket, I think it could be easily confused as something more. So something to be mindful of.
No potato guns, kiddos. No potato
There's
guns.
a group on Keybase who could use your expertise.
Well, there may come a day where I'll put it into practice, but until the Chinese invade our shores, I won't. Or any other tyrant along those lines.
Foreign or domestic?
That's the verbiage.
I believe so. All right, getting back on track. So plates. If someone was completely brand new to armor, which a lot in our community are, it's becoming more and more popular for civilians. I've got an AR, so now I need plates.
Right.
What would be your kind of I don't know, brand spanking new armor 101 kind of introduction to plates?
And these days, I think the answer to these questions is a lot simpler than it used to be.
That's always good.
M855 ammunition has become a lot more popular, and so have a wide variety of other threats that may not necessarily defeat certain types of armor, but led me to sort of shift my thinking away from my old attitude, which was that level 3++ was the right solution, right? Essentially a polymer plate with a thin ceramic strike face. Designed to defeat, M855 or 7.62 by 39 mild steel core. But more and more, I've really shifted my thinking to just say, and recommend level 4. Because you've got different ammunition out there. M855A1, that's going to punch through just about every 3++ plate. That alone was reason enough to shift my thinking. But, you've got other ammunition along those same lines, the M80A1, the 308 variant of the same type. So, with that in mind, I think level 4 is really, especially for someone new to body armor, I think the quick and easy answer is, look, just get level 4. Make sure that it's made in the USA by a reputable company.
Sure,
and what you really... NIJ certified is an absolute must, especially when it comes to level 4, because the requirements are pretty stringent. And so to that end, that's really what I would recommend for anybody. I can take a 10-minute phone call and explain to a customer everything they need to know, everything from 3A, which is rated only for pistols, to level 3, which is rated against all the ball ammo variants, 5.56, 7.62 by 39, or 308. Moving from there, you got what's called 3+. Now, the industry on the retail side typically just stops at 3+, but on the manufacturing side, we break it down to 3+ and 3++. So 3+ would be an all-polymer plate that would stop all the ball variants plus the 7.62 by 39 mild steel core. All right, that's pretty common now, given the technology that's gone into polymer armors. That's an easy thing to do with those type of materials. If you want to stop M855, you jump into a 3++, right? There's the extra plus. But again, if you're out there looking for armor, the simple solution is just go level 4. Look for something that's relatively light. If you're looking at a 10 by 12 plate, or something right around there, say a small or a medium, you want to find something that's under 8 pounds, right? So I've got a good solution that's a 10 by 12 triple curve swimmer plate, level 4, multi-hit. Now I have to be careful when I say multi-hit, because the factory doesn't like me saying multi-hit against 30-06 AP, even though we've tested it against that and it's successfully stopped 2 and probably could have stopped more. But they want me to delineate that.
For legal reasons.
Right. And I think it's just because with 30-06 AP, just about anything can happen. It's a powerful round, and they just want to be careful that I word things in a way that meets with their approval. So fine, we call it multi-hit, and then when it comes to 30-06 AP, we just say, look, 1 hit technically, but then again, there's a video on my Instagram showing it take 2 very easily. But that being the case,
1 hit or more.
It probably could have stopped more, and I probably should have. That was the thought I had yesterday when I was looking at it. I thought I should have hit it again.
Just torture test.
Just keep going until it breaks, right? I'd see what happens.
Throw a grenade at that shit.
Well, and that's where some of the backyard tests start to get a little goofy, right? Which is why I don't like to do this stuff.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, I'll post a video that somebody does, like I did the other day, of an outdoor test. But the problem with all these weird tests that you see online, whether it's got balloons or whatever, I mean, these things are completely unscientific. The only way to really get any genuine results is to test the thing in an NIJ certified lab.
That's what I like about your videos. I mean, it's a completely controlled environment. You can tell there's no, nonsense going on.
Right. And with all of the videos that I see out there that are conducted outside of the lab, there's always some flaw in the methodology. I see people shooting at plates at close range and in a closed room, and I think, does that guy know that he's breathing lead dust? Probably not ever considered that. When he's shooting a plate from 10 feet away in a closed room, you're breathing lead dust. And before long, you're going to start getting kooky. So maybe that's where some of that comes from. I don't know. But, in every case, when I see these backyard tests, there's always a flaw in the methodology. And as a result, it ends up being very misleading, right? If you're shooting steel, okay, well, what type of steel, what type of round, how many grains, what velocity? There's things that are not being accounted for. And, are they using light loads? What are they doing? Just because the round is a given caliber doesn't mean that it has the same velocity, which is why we test it according to velocity. We measure the velocity. And, again, it's fun to shoot a plate. Let's be honest, tape it to a tree and shoot it. That's always fun. But the first thing you should do when you're setting up a plate for a test is you got to have some kind of backer behind it. To simulate the human body, the way that the thing is designed to be worn and used. And so when you set it,
so ask for a volunteer.
No, that's the last thing you want to do. But there's no shortage of volunteers, I can assure you.
What?
But the problem is when you just lean a plate up against a wall and shoot it, you're not getting a genuine result because you're not testing it under real world conditions, which is why in the lab we mount it to a clay backer, and not just any clay backer that has specific temperature to maintain the right pliability to properly simulate the human body and therefore measure results accordingly, right? So again,
and that's to measure like impact trauma and stuff.
That's right. Back face deformation in particular, right? So when you strike a plate, the ceramic or whatever the material is, let's use ceramic as an example, it'll fragment the round, and the polymer backer is designed to catch it. Well, that'll form a dimple on the back. On impact, that dimple might be more than it is after it settles. And so the appropriate standard there is to measure that back face deformation. The clay, obviously, once you move it, it holds that position, which allows you to then measure that back face deformation with caliper.
Because it might
So-
stop the round, but it also might still break ribs or something like that.
Anything greater than 44 millimeter backface deformation is considered by the National Institute of Justice, the NIJ, to be lethal.
Damn.
Whether or not it is in fact lethal is debatable, but that is the standard they use.
How many PSI?
44 millimeters backface deformation. So
Okay. Back.
four
That's
and a
like
half
two.
millimeters.
That's like 2 inches, isn't it?
I don't know.
It's a
Conversions.
little 25 millimeters is less than an inch, so
Yeah.
I don't know. I've got calipers around here somewhere. Let's
Yeah.
see.
I think it's just
Right.
under 2 inches.
it's like
It's
1
under
7/8
2
or something.
That's about right. Yes.
Got a bunch of
That's a decent amount of deformation, though.
Oh, it is. Yeah. It's momentary, but it still,
If you pop your sternum 2 inches in, it's still gonna fuck you up.
2-inch punch
It's
on
not gonna
the-
feel good.
your sternum.
I've
Yeah.
never been shot, but I've heard it feels like getting hit with a ball peen hammer in the chest. Now, that's more soft armor. Hard armor, you take the same material in a soft configuration or in a hard configuration, and you're going to get better performance out of the hard for a number of reasons. When you consolidate the plies and you form a hard plate, number one, you're going to mitigate that backface deformation considerably. You're going to also distribute the force of the impact, the blunt force impact trauma. The hard plate is going to distribute it over a larger area, whereas the soft is going to just tend to give in at the point of impact.
Okay. That makes sense.
So really you want hard plate. Even for guys running around wearing 3A vests, for whatever job they're pointless. You might as well just switch up to a hard plate of the same level, right? So even 3A. I've got those, and they're relatively inexpensive, like $130 a piece, and they will do a much better job of protecting you than any soft armor ever could.
So I guess soft armor is more probably for I don't know, close protection kind of jobs. People who have to look like they're not wearing armor. I guess like you should only wear it if that's your only option. Is what you're saying?
The interesting thing about that though is that I recently designed a shirt which is almost done with production. It's basically a spandex tight fitting compression shirt, spandex with a couple pockets in it, right? So you can drop your plates into it. You can throw a shirt over top of it, and no one would ever know that you're wearing it. Maybe it'd imprint depending on what you're wearing, but throw a windbreaker on and it's completely concealed.
Oh, nice. That's a considerable step up from the fat suits that soft body armor often looks like. So I'm pretty sure that guy's wearing a vest, and it's probably not going to do him much good.
Michelin man kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, real stealthy, that guy.
And in my opinion, being able to conceal armor is a valuable asset, right? Maybe it's not right for every scenario, but it certainly has its time and place.
Oh yeah.
So to that end, I made the shirt. I've also made the road carrier that is designed to be concealable, but in that case, it'll hold rifle-rated plates of any given weight. Right? So that's the benefit of something like that.
Yeah.
So do you need pads behind the polymer plates?
You do not. No. Some of the plates have padding built into them to mitigate blunt force impact trauma, but you do not need them as long as you have what's referred to as a standalone plate, and that is just like it sounds, right? It does its job alone. There are some systems, although fewer and fewer in number as technology develops, but in the past you had what would be called an ICW plate, or in conjunction with, and it was designed to be worn over a soft armor vest of some sort, right? So the two work in combination, in conjunction. But you really don't want any of that. You don't, steer away from the extra weight and the extra bulk and all the nonsense. If somebody's out there looking to get armor, okay, we've already touched on this. Just get a level 4 plate appropriate to your size. If you want a sappy plate, that's kind of that standard cut with a 45-degree, dog ear at the top. A swimmer plate, it's just exaggerated a little bit more to allow for a greater range of motion. But one of those two types of plates, ideally in a triple curve, and you heard me say that word before, but I didn't really define it. So take a steel plate for instance, and I know there's exceptions to this, but by and large they are either flat, which is a nightmare, or single curve. And by that, I mean left to right. And sure, that fits pretty good. But a double curve or a triple curve is just like it sounds, right? In the geometry, in the program, when you're designing these things, you can configure it according to different geometric reference points like curves, right? So you might have a wider curve at the top of the chest and, a smaller curve, essentially a smaller diameter to the radius that you're creating, to the curvature that you're creating. That defines the geometry of the plate and allows it to hold the contours of the body better, right? And the ergonomics of it, as you mentioned earlier. So, essentially just like it sounds. Single curve, okay, fine. That'll work, especially on the back. Double curve, even better. Triple curve really tends to contour to the body a lot better. It really fits the body that much more accurately and allows for, well, when you do that, when you distribute the weight over the body more evenly, the natural result is feeling less of that wear stress. And that's the verbiage that we use in the industry, right? Wear stress. Think of a guy that's carrying a 90-pound ruck, he's got a lot of wear stress. You can mitigate that by way of mimicking the contour of the human body, getting the plates to fit more appropriately. And this, such as is the case with the shoulder plates, right? I mean, those match the contour of the body so well, and they're so light that you literally forget you're wearing them after a couple of minutes.
I was gonna say, how heavy are they? They're like something insane. Like, is it 3 pounds? I wanna.
No, they're a pound.
Really?
A pound and 1.4 pounds for the heaviest version. That's the 3++ version that has the ceramic strike face.
Damn.
So they are very light. The 3A shoulder plates that I have are a half pound each. That's very easy to forget about.
Oh, yeah.
It's held in position properly. You're hardly going to notice it.
Yeah, some people wear more jewelry than that. So
right.
I have a set of flat plates, and it feels like I don't know. It's like hard to breathe. Feels like
you're getting beaten up.
Boa constrictor.
Yeah, it's like a piece of plywood on your chest or something. It's certainly not, shaped to the human body. It's not going to match your contours or feel very good as a result. All of that impact is going to be positioned at one point, right? Maybe a couple of points, but it's not going to distribute itself well over the body like a double or triple curve plate would.
If you're moving around, like your extremities are always hitting those sharp corners. I mean, they might not be sharp, but it sure feels like that the 30th time you've hit it on an 8-mile hike.
That's true. Yeah, no, absolutely. You definitely want to do everything you can to mitigate that wear stress, to allow the plate or the plate system to better work in conjunction with the body, not just in a standing position, but also as you move and walk or run, whatever it is you're doing, you want that system to move in conjunction with your body. And having geometry that matches the contours of the human body is critical to that end.
Moving away from ergonomics, something that a lot of people, a lot of newbies will see when they're looking at, all various armor companies is steel versus ceramic. And then after that, they see shelf life on ceramic. So is that something we could quickly go over?
Yeah, so, okay, quick disclaimer. The plates that we sell have a 5-year manufacturer's warranty, but that's more of an insurance requirement. The plates are certainly good for far longer. The plates in my most recent test videos were 10 years old, and they performed as well as they would on day one.
Oh,
now, I haven't been around long enough to tell you how long these things would last. Decades, certainly. If properly stored, you don't want to leave it out in the weather and in the sun and everything else. And I've had people ask me, well, if I put it in my trunk, is that okay? Yes, it is. That's fine, especially with a polymer ceramic plate. It used to be that polymer plates had a bit of an issue with delamination under extreme circumstances, but a lot of that has been improved on just by way of advancements in materials and production methodologies, that sort of thing.
Nice. So something I've heard is someone mentioned having your ceramics X-rayed, which is
Yes.
an interesting one, and not something everyone's gonna be able to run down to the doc's office and have them take care of.
Right. So LTC has an X-ray machine at their facility, and when we shot that level 4 plate, we put it in the X-ray machine and we took a look at it, and we could see what it was doing. And we did the same after the second shot, and they use that in their drop test. So, and the other question people have about ceramics is, well, gosh, will it break? You know, because in the old days that was more of an issue. LTC uses some proprietary techniques where they infuse ballistic fibers within the ceramic itself, and what that does is help to number one, reinforce the structure of the materials, which even the materials themselves, the core materials, have been improved on greatly. But when you put the ballistic fibers in within the ceramic itself, you know, you reinforce it considerably. And the other thing that does is it mitigates fracturing on impact. And I'll give you an example. I had a shoulder plate, a 3++ shoulder plate, and it had a very, you know, it's got a very thin ceramic breaker plate on it, just over 1/8 of an inch thick. And we hit this thing 4 times with M855, and I've actually got a high-speed, slow-motion video I've posted in the past about this. Maybe I'll post it again after this. We hit it 4 times with M855 in the lab, and afterwards I took it apart. I pulled the polymer off the ceramic backer just to get a good look at what was happening with the fracturing. And all of the fractures were contained in an area with a diameter no bigger than, you know, somewhere between $0.25 and $0.50, right? Mm-hmm. So very small fracturing, very well contained. And this thing had 4 holes in it. And I already told you it's very thin. I can set this thing on the ground, and I've done this 50 times. I weigh 225 pounds. I can stand on this thing, and it, even with 4 holes in it, no cracking, no breaking, no anything, right? It doesn't even make a cracking sound. So, you know, the ceramics these days are very resilient. LTC takes it to a whole nother level. The drop test is configured with a swing arm that's, you know, about 6 feet high. They mount the plate to the face of it. They put a 10-pound weight behind it, and they let it fall to the ground. And I believe the NIJ test requires 2 drops. LTC tests theirs internally with 10. So everything they do, they push way over the requirement. And that's why I like working with them so much, because not only are they good people to work with, and they help me in a lot of different ways, we help each other, but they really genuinely do make, without question, the best product out there. They are widely recognized as the world's largest and most respected armor manufacturer.
Nice.
And that's why it's so important to know where it's coming from, because, you know, I'll tell you what, there's been more than one company that's got in trouble selling Chinese stuff, slapping a fake label on it. There was some company, I forget who it was, but they sold it to, I don't know if it was cops or the feds or the military. They sold it to somebody that they really shouldn't have. They shouldn't be selling that to anybody. And again, that's why it's so important to know where it's coming from, who's making it, you know, where they're making it, what they're making it out of, and to what standard. Yeah, there's so much that goes into it that, you know, for a lot of people, the easy solution is, look, just buy an LTC plate. I don't even care if you buy it from me, just buy it from somebody. Make sure you get something real and genuine that's going to hold up for decades. And that's why LTC is really the top choice. Whether you buy it from me or not, I don't care. I do this primarily to provide protection to the American people, and soon, hopefully, the Canadian people. I'm looking to expand to Canada.
Nice.
Didn't know they could even have body armor.
I know. Well, apparently they can. I've been talking to some attorneys up there and trying to get things in motion. The hardest part is, you know, I want to get them level 4, but it's international, so it falls under ITAR regulations. But if done properly, there's something called the Warehouse and Distribution Agreement that I can establish up there that essentially creates like a TSA fast check portal for ITAR regulated items. So we're looking into that, and we are looking to absolutely provide to every single Canadian that wants this stuff. You know, I live in Montana. Canada's 60 miles from me. These people are my neighbors. Oh, and, you know, oddly enough, especially in the last 6 months or so, I've been contacted by people not just in Montana, not just all over the country, but really all over the world. And that's what kind of blows me away about, what's going on with everything these days, is that it's really getting global attention. And I don't know if that's because I, supported Hong Kong the way that I did. Certainly that's why some of the people there have reached out to me. But, Australia, Germany, Spain, you name it. I've got people reaching out to me from all over the world, and I'm limited in a lot of ways on what I can provide for them. The Bureau of Industry and Security regulates what I can or can't do with anything short of level 4. As I mentioned, anything level 4 falls under ITAR. All of these are things that one has to be very careful about in doing or attempting to do any kind of international transaction, which is why I've got attorneys and everything else working with me to set up Canada. But eventually, I would very much like to be bringing level 4 plates by the truckload up to Canada and doing those people a great service in the process, I think.
Right on. It's interesting you say international, because I actually had at least 4 or 5 questions asking about shipping to the UK, because evidently I've got a fair few UK followers. And I was pretty sure the UK had a completely outlawed body armor, but I just was searching it up just a minute ago, and apparently it's not. Have you ever had any inquiries from the UK?
I've had inquiries. I've never done any business with anyone in the UK. So I am unaware of the extent to which those laws apply.
Yeah, me too. It's
I don't know. It's certainly something to be very mindful of before you attempt to do business in another country.
Oh yeah, they will mess you up several ways of Sunday.
Exactly. And with good reason, right? We don't want to supply this to the wrong people. I wouldn't want this getting in the hands of, enemy combatants anywhere in the world. So certainly something to be very mindful of.
So last thing on the types of body armor.
Hold up. Speaking of enemy combatants, how has the Zero Boots Licked campaign worked for you?
Well, man, it's funny because I did that just to be me, right? That just felt like the natural response to everything that took place with the shooting in Florida, the UPS shooting. Let's talk about that.
The absolute shit show.
Let's do it.
Probably the worst thing I've ever seen cops do ever. And it started with, at midnight, right before I go to bed, I put up an Instagram post, a picture of the scene, and I say, I take issue with police using civilian vehicles for cover.
Meat shields.
And I woke up in the morning to an absolute flood of messages from angry police. And I really couldn't understand it because clearly they were at fault. So what are you doing?
Right.
You would really
hope to defend that, man.
Yeah, you would really hope cops would call out their fellow officers for, crap tactics at the lightest.
The fact that they were going after you.
They
just
were
for commenting on it.
For saying that you shouldn't use humans as shields speaks volumes.
Well, and so what they did is they started hitting me with a lot of 1-star reviews on Facebook. A really petty ploy.
That's petty as fuck.
You mean the cops were petty? What?
Yeah, go figure. And that obviously is a bigger problem that we can talk about a little bit more. But just to tell the story. So I wake up to this, storm of angry messages and 1-star reviews, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to double down. What have I got to lose? I'm just going to tell it like it is. So I put up another post, and I think it said something to the effect of, more proof that this demonstrates the growing police state, something to that effect. And boy, did that ever crank up the heat, right? So, and then the Drug Enforcement Cops Facebook page takes a screenshot of my post, and they posted on their page with the comment, "Let's show Hoplite armor what a police state really is."
Oh my God.
I remember that.
Can you believe it?
Shit.
Yeah.
You don't know how happy that made me, right? Because I thought, now I get to dig into these guys even harder, right? So at that point in my mind, I said, all right, I'm going all in. My second attempt, I'm doubling down. This time, I'm going all in. All my chips are on the table.
The moral high ground.
and quite honestly, I thought it could be the end of my business. I thought, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to stand my ground against the stuff that I think is just inherently wrong. and I'm going to speak my mind, and nothing's going to ever prevent me from doing that. So I went all in, and I called them out, and I reposted their post, and I got to tell you, I was amazed at the public support, and you know, I ended up writing a document, you know, that kind of outlined where I stand on this stuff, right? Because I had cops calling me up and yelling at me and threatening my life and accusing me. One guy told me that I was responsible for every police death that had ever occurred, and I thought, that's about the dumbest damn thing I ever heard in my life. But you know, if that's how you want to feel, go ahead. Yeah, I think I may have called him a redcoat a couple times, but other than that, right. So, you know, I don't take kindly to threats. I don't back down. And, you know, keep in mind, I'm doing this all alone. I've got 90% of the cops, at least it feels like, in the country mad at me, and some percentage of them wants to kill me. Luckily, my next door neighbor is the newly elected county sheriff, and he's a constitutional sheriff. He's a good man. And he and I had conversations a couple weeks prior about red flag laws, and he had told me that not he nor any county sheriff in the state of Montana would ever enforce any red flag law. And I'm quite certain that there was an attempt or two made to red flag me, but they were, of course, successful. You know, my neighbor in Montana, that means something. You know, when it snows and he's stuck, I'm over there with my tractor, you know, digging him out. Or plowing his driveway before it even gets bad, you know, and the same for him. You know, last year my arm was injured, and I wake up to a sound on my porch, and I look out, and his two boys are out there shoveling my walkway for me. You know, I mean, that's how it is up here. People genuinely care about each other. They care about what's right, and they value the Constitution above all else. And that's really something to really be respected in today's world, especially. I mean, I think that's a universal truth that goes back to the dawn of time, that we look out for each other. And it's something that sadly we've lost sight of. And that kind of brings me to the state of the nation with regards to a lot of police, in particular police in the big cities. And, you know, a lot of this came about as a result of my years of experience in dealing with everybody with regards to armor. I had a police officer in Chicago. He was a SWAT cop, and I was out there dealing with him, oddly enough, on the flashbang grenade. And in the course of our conversation, he told me once how during a raid, they threw a flashbang grenade through a window. It landed in a crib. It maimed the baby. But in his words, it's okay. We got out of it with a little creative writing. And I thought, my God, that's the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. And it certainly was one of them. Another interesting thing I heard from, oddly enough, another cop in Chicago. This probably is giving us some indication of what's happening there. This guy, you know, he was getting real friendly with me on the phone, and he felt very comfortable. And he says, "Oh, you should join us for some of our poker games. You know, we get hookers and Coke." And I thought, and I said, "What? You know, what are you talking about?" And he says, "Oh, don't worry, the Coke's for the hookers." And I thought, well, you know what? I don't really care what you do, you know, but if you're going to go out and arrest people for the same thing you're doing,
the same shit,
there is an inherent problem that needs to be dealt with. And, you know, it doesn't take more than a couple days to see the next video of police abuse anymore. I mean, this has become so common that I think it's like routine procedure for a lot of these guys. And you know, look, it happens. We've seen examples of this in various sociological experiments, right? Where, you know, take for example, I forget what the experiment was called. I think it was maybe a Harvard study.
Stanford prison.
Stanford, that's the other Ivy League school, right? So you know the one, right? You know, you give these guys power over somebody else, and before long, they're abusing it. And unfortunately, that really seems to be the case in modern America, where a lot of our officers have lost sight of their oath, right, to defend the Constitution. Well, what does that mean? You know, I think they say these words without giving much consideration to it. But first and foremost, it's everyone's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And anything that someone might do to disrupt that, in my opinion, is at the very least getting dangerously close to violating the constitutional rights of an individual, especially when it's a state-sanctioned agency that's doing it. And it has become all too common. And that's certainly something that I take great issue with.
Right. And that's where the absolutist absolutist stances come into play, because it's like, well, any cop that's going to enforce these unconstitutional gun laws is an oath breaker. But then you say, well, what are the unconstitutional gun laws? And we're like, well, I mean,
all of them.
If you just read the words, you know, like
all of them.
Yeah, all of them.
Yes. And so that kind of leads well into what I'm trying to do now, right? Run for governor. And why am I trying to do that? Well, I think we've been talking about it this whole time without saying it. Look at what's happening all across the country. It started in Virginia. You've got things happening in Washington and even Arizona, you know, Florida, Georgia, you name it. Every state seems to be popping up with you know, whether it's red flag laws, right? And let's talk about that for a second. What is a red flag law? Okay, so a guy exercises his First Amendment right to free speech. So we're going to violate his Fourth Amendment right to privacy and bust in his door and take away his Second Amendment right to bear arms as a result. This is a slippery into absolutely losing our foothold on freedom. Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, the whole thing, yeah. You have these people who swear to uphold the law of the land, and they're
Right.
violating the very core of it. And
That's very true.
For a living.
Now, one thing you guys will like, okay, back in 2009, Montana passed something called the Montana Firearms Freedom Act. And essentially what that said is that any firearm made in the state, sold in the state, and kept in the state is outside of the control or jurisdiction of Congress, who attempts to do these things by way of the 10th Amendment, giving them control over interstate trade. Well, we're not talking interstate. This is within the state. And so effectively, the Montana Firearms Freedom Act nullified the NFA. But Governor Schweitzer was afraid to do so. He was afraid to ratify it based on pressure he was getting from the ATF and threats from the federal government to cut state funding. Bullock didn't even touch it. And I can tell you this, day one, that would be the first thing I would do. Ratify the Montana Firearms Freedom Act and nullify the NFA.
right on.
We've got other ways that we can generate resources for the state. And I've got some plans on that I have yet to really make public, but things that will allow Montana to stand on its own 2 feet financially outside of the control of the federal government.
That's what people like. As a whole, if you guys quit paying the government federal taxes, you'll have a lot more money. When you guys aren't paying for all that upkeep in Washington.
Well, there's so much to that I don't think it's something I want to dig into in depth at the moment, but there is a lot of ways that we can absolutely establish Montana as a financial stronghold through which we can begin to determine our own fate and control our own destiny. My biggest concern with the federal government is, financially speaking, it's a house of cards, and eventually that house of cards is going to fall. And what's going to happen? Think about what's going to happen to a lot of little families out there that are dependent on some sort of subsidy, or old people that are living off of Social Security income, or the disabled, you name it, the list goes on and on. And, when the inevitable happens and that house of cards does come crashing down, it's going to be the people that are stuck holding the bag, not the politicians who are going to sit in their cushy bunkers and wait out any kind of disaster. It's going to be the people. And I think about in particular, right, the women and the children, the elderly too. The most vulnerable parts of our society are going to take the brunt of any sort of disruption in normal function. And that is a real problem. And that's something that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. I mean, a state like Montana, you can't have someone unable to pay the heating bill. It's the same thing that happens in England. People genuinely die because they can't keep the heat on, like old people, the disabled and such.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very unfortunate, and a lot of people don't like to face those sorts of facts. They'd rather sweep it under the rug and pretend that everything's okay. But I think if you just take a open-minded view of what's going on around you, it's not too hard to connect the dots and realize that we are very vulnerable. as a society. You just look at the power grid alone. It's been said that if an enemy were to detonate a nuclear warhead of sufficient size over, say, the middle of the United States, that it would disrupt and destroy the power grid for most of the country, resulting in, and this is based on a study I read, but resulting in a death of, I believe they said 90 some odd % of the population within a year's time.
Oh,
so we are very vulnerable. And if we don't take action, and it has to go to the point of action, it can't be talk any longer. We really need to take action to put certain barriers in place to protect our people against, again, what is, in my estimation, the inevitable.
Right on. So, I mean, how far would you go if the federal government wasn't playing ball? So we have various states like the proposed state of Jefferson and Appalachia. Various people talking about potentially seceding if the federal government, really is kind of pushing it towards, as we saw in Virginia, kind of a civil war kind of scenario. Not to be dramatic, but it's getting tense. And how far would you go faced with those kind of situations?
So I'm going to respond to that question the way that every president I can remember has responded to a threat, by saying that all options are on the table.
I dig it.
All options.
So
so whatever that might be, whether it's secession or something more extreme, one needs to react to the circumstance accordingly. We're not there now, so my hope is, well, that's the word going around, of course, right? And it's my hope, right, that we can avoid that sort of thing. There was a book written by a man.
When do we get there when we recognize that?
Right. If I tell you to execute Order 66, you know what to do.
No, I'm just saying, like, when do we get there when we recognize that the enforcement arm of the enforcement branch has violated their oath? Basically every politician is violating their oath. Like when do we get there?
Look, we're already there, but here's the solution. All right. There's a book written by a man named Gene Sharp. It's called How to Start a Revolution. And these are the approaches that he outlines were utilized in Kosovo, whenever it was, in the late 80s, maybe it was the 90s. So there's a book, but there's also a documentary. And I watched the documentary. And in that, there's a colonel that we sent over there to put these things in place. And he explains it like this. He holds a book in his outstretched hand, right, on his fingers. And he says, my fingers represent the pillars of society, right? Military, police, education, healthcare, you name it. And the book on his fingers represents society. And he makes the point that if you destroy the pillars of society, what happens? That book comes falling down. And with it, society. And then again, we're talking about the most vulnerable in society and the inevitable result on them. And that's what we need to avoid. And so he makes the point, rather than destroying the pillars of society, what you need to do is transfer that society to new and strong pillars based on the ideals of the people. And so, in so doing, he transfers the book to the other hand to create a visual. And it makes a lot of sense because, if we're going to boogaloo, well, guess what? There's going to be a lot of collateral damage. And that's something we really need to consider. All options are always on the table. And if it ever comes to that, I'll be the first one telling you what to do. But let's hope we don't get there, because there's too much at stake.
Oh no, we're all about the bloodshed is horrific.
We're all about peaceful resolution, but like that saying about the difference between being peaceful and I guess you have to be able to be dangerous in order to be considered peaceful.
Sure, I'm familiar with that, and you're right.
And it's just a preparation too, because really, the whole government, they might have separate pillars, but if one of those pillars crumble, the rest of the structure really isn't strong enough to hold up society.
That's a very good point.
So, not to mention the pillars are crumbling anyway. Like
they are.
They are.
Maybe it's not even a boogaloo so much run by the people, but because of the collapse of government that causes some huge gang activities or
right. That's exactly the concern. And my hope with running for governor is not just to win and to protect Montana, but to set an example to other people in other states to do the same thing, whether it be running for governor or running for mayor or city council. We need people that understand the value of the Constitution and the importance of our foundational laws to take the seats of power at every level. We need that desperately. It's really our only hope long term. You know, you can burn everything to the ground, but in the end, you're just left with ashes. And we've got too much at stake. You know, look at what we've built in this nation, you know, something that the world really has never seen. And we're not perfect, but it's a good foundation to build on. And what we need to do is clear away some of that debris, some of these rotten pillars, replace them with reinforced structures, so to speak. And we do that by electing people that adhere to and believe in the Constitution of the United States.
Gotcha. So, what's your when it comes down to it, what's your opinion on the federal government? Do you think that's a sustainable thing, or do you think we should be getting down to a more state rights kind of level? Because that's kind of what I'm getting from your platform.
You should be getting that loud and clear. Yeah, absolutely.
Gotcha.
And, you know, let's talk about the federal government for a minute. Let's focus on the Federal Reserve, right, which is not part of the federal government, even though they give us every indication that they are. The federal government is, in fact, run by central banks and, through a long series of paperwork, is essentially privately owned. Unconstitutionally, they collect our taxes and lend money to our government, and that is a direct violation of the standard by which we are to operate, where Congress is the one that is supposed to be issuing currency, not a central bank.
I mean, we saw that going awry right after the Civil War with what was it? Not union notes. They were damn it, whatever they were.
Federalist Papers.
Something like. Should have brought it up if I can't remember the name. I just listened to Matt from the Status Quo's podcast talking about them not being able to pay revolutionary soldiers.
I listened to that the other day. I can't remember what it was called though.
Yeah, I'm I'm a bad historian. Anyway, yeah, I mean it's all a lot of people are predicting it's kind of coming to a close, and what you're talking about with kind of making sure Montana is it can stand on its own 2 feet, I guess, before it's part of a union. Is that kind of like the angle?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question, to be honest with you.
So is your aim to make Montana its own self-sustaining entity within the U.S., like where rather than being reliant on federal funds, which is often what they the first thing they threaten when you
the first thing they try to pull. Yeah, exactly. The first card.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so, you know, whether or not Montana secedes, I personally would prefer not. What I would really like to see is the restoration of right-minded thinking and laws being reestablished all across the country. That's the best thing I could hope for.
Gotcha.
You know, again, all options are on the table, right? You know, there may come a point in time where the people of Montana decide they've had enough. And, you know, if that's the case, I will assist them in whatever it is that they seek to do. You know, I said something the other night that I really liked. I thought it came out well. You know, I was talking to my wife about all this stuff. And I told her, I said, you know, I'm not running for governor so that I can tell people what to do, but rather so I can tell government what not to do. And I think that really kind of sums up everything I'm talking about, right? The will of the people is what we should be looking to satisfy. And, you know, so the Boogaloo, we got a lot of young people that are really upset. They recognize that their future is being stolen out from under their noses and that their hands are tied. There's very little they can do through you know, the normal channels that were established by the founding fathers, whether it's voter fraud or, you know, illegal immigrants being brought in to act as a voter base for the Democrats, or the Federal Reserve, or the list goes on. And I think it starts, I think fixing things begins by legitimizing the concerns of the people, right? These are legitimate concerns, and they're being overlooked by a majority of those in power who act like leaders when in the end they are supposed to be representatives, representing the will of the people, not enforcing and applying unique rules to themselves. Like take Congress, for example. They're allowed to do insider trading. We're not. Their argument is that by default, their job will expose them to insider information and they shouldn't be prevented from trading stocks. Well, that's how you get people who make $150,000 a year end up with $100 million. These people are using it for their own gain, and that's
Absolutely.
a big problem.
Yep.
And so we begin by legitimizing the concerns of the people. The people out there that are concerned about these things, that are upset about these things, and can't see any other resolution other than, initiating or responding to some sort of civil war type scenario or revolution, however you want to word it. I get where they're coming from. I feel the same way.
Who is your favorite of the founding fathers?
Well, for a long time, I would have told you George Washington because I share a birthday with him, and growing up as a kid, he's the guy, right? But then I found out about the Whiskey Rebellion, and I thought, Thomas Jefferson is kind of cool. I got a lot in common with that guy. And
how would TJ handle this situation right now?
Probably lots of ropes and guillotines, I would imagine. But, that was a different time.
Certainly seeing people.
Was it really that different of a time?
I'm not able to really hear you very well.
Man, you're.
I can't hear you, bud.
Yeah, your audio is getting worse and worse, Gramps. It's like you downgraded
I
from
think he said something to the effect of, is it really a different time, or are times so different that those standards don't apply? And I would answer that by saying, if anything, we've got more to lose. There are a lot of people in this country that are dependent on the social structure that we all operate in, and it's those. Again, that's who I'm concerned about. Think of like all the single mothers with little kids.
How many?
What are they going to do with this fact?
How many of them are contributing to the problem?
Well, that's a very good point, right? Through the welfare state and things of this nature. But, it's hard for someone who's in a desperate position to refuse an offer of help. It's a tough thing to really deal with and to solve. But, again, it begins with legitimizing people's complaints and working towards solutions that actually address the problem and don't just circumvent it or otherwise disregard it.
Yeah, they'll never be on our side pretty much if their problems are never solved in good, sustainable ways, and they will continue to go to that welfare state.
Or if they're solved by the state, they're never going to be motivated to correct
hopefully.
the problem.
Yeah, no,
hopefully
all
we
good
can
points.
teach them in those times,
And none of these are easy problems to solve, but, I feel like I have a little bit of an advantage in problem solving just by being a mechanical engineer. I mean, by default, that's what you do. You're a problem solver. And that's how I make my living, is solving problems, whether it be designing an armor system that works properly or figuring out how to fit all the guts inside of an electronic flashbang grenade, or something bigger like solving the issues that face a state. In the end, it's all just problem solving, right? And I think really what we need to start to look for is problem solving approaches, answers that challenge conventional thinking. We have to really try to think of new and unique solutions to these problems. And there's a lot that I'll reveal when I release my economic plan that goes into that in some detail. And I think it's there that we can find perhaps the core of our solution. There's a couple of things that I'm going to propose that are very outside of conventional thinking. One of the things I'd like to do with Montana, I'd like to see us establish what I refer to as the MIA, the Montana Intelligence Agency. Not to look inward like the Patriot Act does, but rather to look outward. to identify and assess any threats that might affect Montana or its citizens now or in the future. And so what does that mean when I say looking outward? Well, looking at anyone and anything that is doing, saying, or working towards any end goal that might undermine the sovereignty of Montana itself. And I believe that every state in and of itself is really a sovereign entity. And we touched on that a little bit, when talking about Fed versus state. And, in my opinion, the rule of law within a state, certainly first and foremost, the U.S. Constitution. Second to that, the state constitution. And anything that is contrary to those, and I've seen it said there's a law that I can't quite properly quote, but any law that is repugnant to the Constitution is by default null and void.
Gotcha. My one concern with an MIA might be perhaps your administration would use it correctly and as intended, but would you not fear perhaps a future, let's say, like a Democrat takes over after you and is then like, oh, well, I'm now going to re-instruct the MIA to focus on red flag laws because we've got all these dangerous Montana gun owners who have NFA items, and we're going to restore federal order in Montana, and we now have this agency to help us in that.
The way I would envision something like that would be, number one, their responsibility would be to report these things to the people, directly to the people, whether by, data dumps like WikiLeaks or, through a formal publication. But, and I go into this a little bit more in some of my other documents that I haven't released, but essentially, I'm looking to build a structure by which the state is controlled by the people solely. And in that way, some of these things are mitigated. Now, certainly, you can have, actors crop up in the future that can undermine all manner of things that we put in place. But the concerns that I'm really focusing on are, corrupt politicians in D.C., cartels, maybe not just in Montana, but anywhere. Where are they? What are they doing? And, how can we address this sort of thing? I don't think that intelligence gathering by itself or in and of itself is a threat. It really has more to do with the application of that intelligence gathering. And, here's the way I look at it. Montana cannot make intelligent decisions for its future without real, timely, and accurate information. We simply need that. The news is fake. It's owned by conglomerates that are in bed with all of these different interests, and in no way, shape, or form are they acting on behalf of the people. So, essentially what I'm talking about is you might call it intensive investigative reporting more than anything, right? Because we're not talking about a law enforcement arm. We're talking about an intelligence gathering method by which the people are given information by which they can help better determine their own destiny.
So state
and I think
news?
if these things are set up, well, I don't know if you call it state run. I don't like the term state run anything, but let's just call it real information. We need a source of real information, and the people need access to that information. If they don't have it, how can they make any kind of decision with any sort of logic or reason?
Gotcha. I have my fears about a centralized source for news, but
well, you and I both have some of the same concerns, right? But in the end, it comes down to the simple fact that if the people don't have real information, all they have is lies.
Well, I like to think that technology in itself is bringing us to that. I mean, look at what social media has done. Yeah, there's a lot of bad things that go along with it, but I think some of those stigmas are starting to be overcome. Just look at online dating.
That's
when it
very
first
true.
started, people thought it was the dumbest thing ever. Now, most people, at least half of them, meet online.
Social media has enabled the rapid transfer of information between people like nothing else ever before, without question. And that is absolutely critical to.
In line with that, I think keeping information decentralized rather than centralized is kind of there's no real agenda, like, potentially ever attached. Like, of course, people have their own thing, but when you've got just information everywhere, all sorts of people want to learn stuff, all sorts of people want to, share what they know. I think decentralized solutions are, by and large, always going to be more effective than a centralized source in my.
And I've always said if I was a billionaire, I'd have my own CIA. I'd want to know what Nancy Pelosi is eating for breakfast and who she's talking to. Because these are the people that I'm greatly concerned about. I would love to have real information about what these people are doing. And really, what's the end goal? Bring them to justice. Because they're guilty of 1,000 things. We need to bring them to justice, but we can't do it without the information, without the evidence.
They're all guilty. They're all guilty.
Well, you're right about that, but unless we can prove it, we're looking at a kangaroo court. We're better.
I mean, their policies alone. Their oath of office, their policies that go against the Constitution are crimes amongst themselves. Now we just need a judicial system that would actually do something about it. The problem is they're in bed with the people that are committing the crimes too.
I was going to say, let alone the Constitution, it's their policies that go against natural rights that are the real issue.
That's very true. Absolutely. And so what do we need? We need to restore the Constitution in its purest form.
Gotcha. So, if we've been keeping you quite a bit, but I think a good question to wrap up on would be, would you have I don't like putting people in boxes, but for the sake of our listeners, is there a particular label you would apply to yourself, like, constitutionalist?
Yes. You took the word right out of my mouth. Yes, constitutionalist, without question.
Gotcha. And then, I guess advancing on that, are you running as a Republican, independent, libertarian? What are you working with?
I wanted to run as an independent. I could not justifiably associate myself with the Republicans and certainly not the Democrats. I wanted to run as an independent, but I realized early on that was going to hurt my chances, and with it, the chances of the people of Montana getting a fair shake in this thing. So I was persuaded to run under the Libertarian Party. And I had my hesitation about that because there are some characters out there that don't do the party justice. But by and large...
True of any group.
Yeah. The guy with the boot on his head in particular comes to mind. But... and I think what I can do there is I can bring a greater level of unity and maybe legitimacy in the eyes of the people to that party by way of policy and being outspoken to the effect that changes are actually made and good things come about. So I did go ahead, decide, and run as a libertarian. I can't necessarily say that title describes me as well as constitutionalist. That's certainly a better description. But I knew that I could get a fair amount of assistance from the Libertarian Party. So to that end, I felt like that was probably my best strategy.
Well, I'd certainly say a constitutionalist is a lot closer than what many other members of the party have amounted to. So certainly a step in the right direction.
Well, and I'm figuring these things out as I go. I've never run for office, and
Gotcha.
It's certainly challenging. Even just a few days into it. I filed my paperwork last Friday officially. I've been talking about this for some time, but it was made official on February 21st. And so I'm new to it, and there's a lot going on, and it's very difficult to navigate some of that, but I do have some good people there at my side that are, working with me and helping guide me through it and really kind of clearing a path for me, making things easy. I believe that there is wisdom in much counsel, right? That's a biblical proverb that I think really makes a lot of sense. Wisdom and much counsel. So I've sought the advice of a lot of different people. I don't necessarily take people's advice, but I want to know what they have to say. I want to know what other viewpoints are. And I want to, always put myself in a position where when presented with overwhelming evidence, contrary to what I might have previously believed, that I would be open-minded enough to shift my way of thinking. And I think that's important.
Oh, of course. Right. So, if you want to put out your plugs, your campaign website, your company, yourself on Instagram, etc.
Well, okay, sure. The campaign site is lyman2020.com, Lyman, Lima Yankee, Mary Alpha November 2020.com. And I've posted some of the documents that I've released on that site. You can find it under the campaign category. And there's some other things there, merchandise and whatnot, shirts and hats and bumper stickers, all that sort of thing.
We'll look at that.
The armor website, as you know, hoplitearmor.com. Hotel Oscar Papa Lima India Tango Echo Armor.com, named after the ancient Greek citizen soldiers to whom we owe the foundations of our republic.
Awesome stuff. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on, man.
No, happy to do it. Thank you for having me on.
No worries.
Yeah, man.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Good
very
luck.
much.
You got my support.
All right.
I appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
Hey, thanks for coming on.
You got it. Anytime. Hopefully, we'll do it next year in a victory lap.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to have a governor on. That'd be cool.
That would be a lot of fun, and I'd be happy to come back on if that were the case. One way or the other, I'm here to discuss whatever you like at any time.
If nothing else, we can have you back on for armor again.
Well, yeah, why not? I'll do some tests here in the near future, some live stream tests with different steel plates, demonstrating some of the issues in regards to that. So keep your eye out for that sort of thing.
Awesome, man.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Hey, guys, have a good one.